I'm Eric Newton, and this is The Together Show. We all know relationships take work, but what is that work, and how do we do it? As a former divorce lawyer, I've watched thousands of couples break up firsthand. Having seen the worst in relationships, I decided to try to help couples stay together. So on this show, we talk to real couples and find out what love really looks like.
We went to dinner to a really cool restaurant called Aziza in San Francisco. And we sat down for dinner. And the first question I asked him is this where you're going to ask me to marry you? So he was completely floating. He was like, well, I'm going to ask you on my own time.
Welcome to the show, everybody. Thanks for listening. I'm excited to say that we've been asked to create a radio program based on our podcast. Now, I can't disclose the details just yet, but I can tell you that it's going to involve a listener call-in segment. So we're looking for questions from listeners about relationships. And if you have any questions or if you would like some advice about your relationship, give us a call and leave us a message at 415-483-5112. We'll get right back to you, and we might be able to include you on our pilot. Once again, that number is 415-483-5112. And I'll include that number in the show notes in case you missed it here. Now on to the show. Today's episode is about the intersection of romance and honesty. Now, we all sell our partners on some kind of a fantasy when we first meet. It's part of how we seduce one another. And new relationships are often characterized by a kind of fearless optimism about the future. There's nothing wrong with that fantasy or that optimism. They're sweet, they're romantic. That said, it is possible to withhold too much about our true selves in those times. And as we've seen on this show, healthy relationships are usually founded on complete communication. Our guests today, Matthew and Sophie-Charlotte, are a fascinating balance of these two stages of being in love. One is the undying romantic optimist, the other an unrepentant realist. And the way in which their relationship comes together is through the insight that true love is ultimately about acceptance. So with that, let's go to our interview with Matthew and Sophie-Charlotte. And we've been talking about the way that you two got your relationship started, which is very endearing. It's a really cute story. And Matt, you had just brought up that you'd been married before and divorced. I've got some questions about that. And Sophie-Charlotte, I'd also like to know, what is your relationship history? Have you been married before, or long-term relationships?
So I haven't been married before, but I've been in a few long-term relationships.
And how long is long?
The longest one is 7 years.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's a significant amount of time. Okay, and did you have any concerns that, Matt, she had never been married before?
No. I mean, when you look at what she's done over her lifetime, it totally makes sense, if you think what she came over here for graduate school, went to Stanford, started working at some big tech companies, started a few of her own companies, runs a tech firm, wrote a book. I mean, they're just, sometimes you just don't have enough time to, if you're, when you're that accomplished and that busy in life, I could totally see, where there just wouldn't be time for it.
There wouldn't be time, and I hear your point, and let me play devil's advocate just for the sake of it. Could it also possibly mean, not saying that it does, that she's just not focused on relationships and therefore hasn't developed the skill that might be necessary to keep one going for the long term?
Well, I think I had, I actually addressed that, in the beginning of the relationship. I'm the kind of person, if there's not time for me and I can see it, then there's no need to be around. And so when it came around again, she's definitely in it this time. And she's into me. So that's all that really matters. I don't care. I don't really, that would be kind of, I don't know, trying to predict the future too much. You just kind of, I deal with what's in front of me, and she's into me, and every step we've made to be more serious, she's into it. So I can only go with what I'm given.
Yeah, you can only go with it. And that's a really good point. It raises another question for me, which is what's different about long-term dating or long-term committed relationship and marriage in your mind?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we actually had that discussion because in our relationship, excuse me, we bring a lot of differences, and one of them is a cultural difference. She's from France, and I'm from here in the U.S. My parents are still married, and so I grew up with the example that there's more fulfillment in a committed relationship. It's like a step above than just being together. I think she grew up with a little bit of a different example, and we had discussed that before. In fact, it was really that discussion. It was kind of comical because we were talking about the idea of marriage, and she was just like, "Well, I really don't see any reason for us to get married."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay." I was like, I can be with you and not be married if that's where you're willing to go. But I said, you should just know that I think that marriage is a step above a relationship, and I think that there's a more commitment there. And I believe that that's, where I would want us to be. But if you're not comfortable being there, I'm into you enough. It's fine. We could be there. We could be together, and and
what he said exactly
it's so romantic, isn't it?
It's so completely romantic. What he said exactly was, there's something really special about giving a piece of yourself to somebody, and it shattered so many of my beliefs, like beliefs that I've had for years, where I'm like, well, why get married? We're not, really looking to have children and things like that. So I started thinking about this a lot, and I see myself as, a very generous person. That's one of the core values that I have. And all of a sudden, like, he made me realize that I wasn't being very generous, So I changed my perspective because of that sentence.
And what did you change your perspective to? How do you articulate it now?
So that conversation happened in November, I think, or October. And then I took some time to think about it. And in January, we both came back from, the winter break after Renaissance meetings and things. And we went to dinner and to a really cool restaurant called Aziza in San Francisco. And we sat down for dinner. And the first question I asked him is this where you're going to ask me to marry you? And he looks at me like, where is that coming from?
I had no idea.
This is par for the course. You're like, I'm taking things literally. I thought we weren't getting married, and now she's and now she's switching on you again.
Oh, yeah.
It's so great. Okay, so you asked him that. He was totally floored.
So he was completely floored. He was like, well, I'm going to ask you on my own time. I think that's what you said.
That was your answer, man?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have to understand that, Sophie-Charlotte, like I said, she's a very accomplished woman. And one of the things I admire about her is just her ability to get things done.
Yeah.
And that comes from, her not being afraid to ask of a person what's needed. And while I appreciated that, and I love giving her the space to be who she is, at a certain point, I am a man, and and I still believe that if this is going to happen, there's going to be a little bit of tradition in this.
But that was that the first time you had a green light to know that you even could ask her to marry you?
Oh, that was the first time, yeah. So it was just kind of like, it was so from left field. I'm like, well, no, I'm not going to, not under these conditions.
Not now.
Not now.
Not even a ring.
Exactly. So, and I had mentioned that before and about tradition, and she was just like, tradition, So, but I was just like, I'll ask you in my own time.
Okay, now I love the story, but you still didn't answer the question, Sophie-Charlotte, which was, what did you change your perspective to?
Yeah, so really, I think the big difference is all of a sudden I realized that, you could really be not just having a great time with someone and sharing like a space, but really like building, life together and the notion of commitment, I think, like really growing together, understanding one another differently, better, and then growing a whole new part of yourself. I think that, like I have a relationship with Matt that I never thought I would ever have with anybody. It's really, really strange.
There was a phrase that you repeated of his that seemed like it was the critical one for you, where he said, there's something about marriage where, and I'm not going to get it right, but where we give something of ourselves to the other person.
That's right, yes.
And that was what really shifted everything for you. What was it about that phrase?
It was the part about being generous, right? Like if you give a piece of yourself, like we were talking about, so Matt races motorbikes, right? So it's a bit of a risky business, or it can be a risky business, right?
Very risky.
And
Not really.
and one of the conversations we had was, my father was very, very ill when I was growing up, like terminally ill for like years on end, and so part of me feels I've paid my dues to. I know it's a horrible way to say that, but I think you get my point. Like I've understood enough what it is to be with someone who's suffering so much. And one of the conversations we've had was like, okay, what happens if there's something happens to one of us, and one of my big points was, look, like we cannot expect that we'll be there in that kind of circumstances. I don't think it's fair. And it's very much like baggage, right? I mean, it's obvious that, I feel I've carried a lot of my father's illness, and it's like, well, why would I spend more of my life doing that, right?
Oh, I want to make sure I understand. In this part, you were saying to him, if he was injured in a motorcycle accident, for instance, and became terminally ill or crippled, that you would have a hard time sticking around?
Pretty much, yes. I know it's hard. I mean, I know
powerful.
it's hard. I know it's hard to say. The thing is, like I say that, and then I was always here for my father. He actually broke his ankle. I was here for him. So there's like sort of the stand where it's like, God, I've had a lot of that in my life, and I don't want that, like the wishful thinking. And then there's also the action, which is I'm here actually. But yeah, so a lot of these conversations very early on we had in our relationship.
And we can't just skip over that one. That is a powerful conversation, and no judgment about it. I mean, I think that's a question that everybody, if they're being honest with themselves, has about partnership. And a lot of people want to say what you did say, but don't have the courage to do it because they are afraid of looking bad, or they're afraid of scaring the other person away.
Mm-hmm.
You actually said that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, why did you know that it was safe to say that to him?
Well, because I didn't know that it was safe to say that to him. There was a risk that he was going to say, well, it doesn't work for me, or that he was going to say, well, then I'm going to stop racing, which I wouldn't want him to do any of that, right? But I just, we were doing this one day at a time. We were very, very honest in our communication. I thought it was the right thing to do. And we had a lot of these sort of hard conversations. And what, like, repeatedly amazed me is that Matt would come back and say, that's fine, but I'll be here if something like that happens to you. And every time I would feel terrible, right? Like, okay, I was brutally honest, and that's part of building a relationship. And then you come back to me and say, my values are, I'm going to be here. I was just like constantly amazed, right? So that really like made me think a lot about what are old beliefs, versus like new relationships, and what does it mean to be here for somebody. And it was really, really moving.
Okay, so I want to ask Matt a question about this, and then I'm going to come back to you and ask how that's changed for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Matt, she says to you, I love you and I love this relationship, but if a terrible thing happens to you and I'm having to give you palliative care or home care, I'm probably not in. And you must have had an emotional reaction to that. And then you came back and said, okay, fine, but I would be here for you, so let's continue with the relationship. What made it clear to you that the, frankly, one-sidedness of that was okay?
Well, it's the understanding of what she went through with her dad. I mean, when she says long term, I mean, this is what, 12?
It's
almost like
his entire
lifetime,
life,
his entire life, where he
or my
was-
entire life, rather.
Yeah, where she went through this, and so I can understand the perspective of that, and it wasn't necessarily. I mean, it wasn't about me. It's about the experience that she went through. Now, like I said before, you have to take what's in front of you. I know what happened, when I broke my ankle, and I know she was there the entire time. And yes, I'm not comparing palliative care with an ankle break, but when I've been in need, she's always been there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't spend my life on the, what if something bad happens? I mean, like she said, I race motorcycles and AFM, and it's not, my focus is always like, okay, how can I get better and go faster and do this better? It's never about, what happens if I crash?
Right.
Because, I mean, I also teach motorcycle racing, and like when people come to me and they're like, what if I crash? I'm like, that's not your focus.
And you can't focus on the crash.
If you're going to focus on the negative with anything, you're going to create the negative.
Yeah.
And so just by my nature, I just don't focus on the negative. I don't really want to spend a lot of time on the negatives or the what ifs. So I understand her perspective with that. And I'm not saying there's not a chance something like that could happen. But I mean, if it did, that would be, I would imagine that would be a journey that I would either have to take care of not myself, but I mean, there is a network of people around me that I would be fine with.
Yeah.
But
mm-hmm. There's a network. I was with you right up until you said that.
Right.
Like, because I really get the focusing on everything that is working, and also maybe not, and just maybe giving her the room to grow through the place that she's at because of her past. But then you said this thing about if something did happen, I would have a network,
mm-hmm.
which then makes me think, but if you're in a marriage and you're relying on your network, is that okay?
No, I'm not relying on a network day to day. I mean, if I dared play the what if game, I mean, I went through the process of like, okay, she's saying that she couldn't be around with this. Like, all right, well, for a second, what if?
Yeah.
Well, there is a network that, of people that, could help me. I understand her enough and give her the space to be who she is. And I'm not trying to change her. I mean, I think she's given enough examples where, she'll go back and like think about things and usually come back with something else. But I wasn't trying to change her in that moment. I'm appreciating the fact that I'm in a relationship with someone that encourages me to go and do what I really love to do. I mean, that's way more valuable than playing the what if game.
Yeah.
I'd rather focus on what we have here. So.
It's so powerful. I'm so moved by both of you. Sophie-Charlotte, the courage to say this thing that you knew was risky for the sake of being direct and clear and honest and building a strong relationship foundation. And you, Matt, for having the insight that that you didn't even say this, but this is what I'm picking up in the implication is that the only true love is to love her for exactly who she is,
yeah,
and not who she's not, or could be or should be.
Exactly.
That's just so powerful, and in a scary thing it is frankly quite real for you. I mean, you do it's a very high risk profession / passion.
And that's it. All of that was before we had that whole, or I had that whole transformation
Yes.
around, what it is to be here for someone for real, right? Which is kind of interesting, right? Like the letting go and
And that's the perfect segue to my next question, which is how. So, are you still in the same place, or if not, how has it changed for you on this issue?
yeah, so it's changed. That's the part of like, okay, when we're getting married, we're actually, creating something that's bigger than just the two of us separately.
Yeah.
And the interesting part is all of these things were, now I say are old beliefs. At the time, I didn't think they were old beliefs. I think they were like very thought through, rational stands in the world. And so that's, kind of how shattered like a lot of my own, constructs and thinking has been by this relationship.
And when you say that now you're focused on building something bigger together, this concept called marriage, or the marriage relationship, how does that directly impact the specific issue of if he is in palliative care?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, we don't think that much about it right now because it's a lot of the learning is exactly what Matt's saying. It's like we can't really play the what if scenarios.
Yeah.
Because actually, like, there are so many of them.
There really are.
And when we can't predict anything. So far, we've only gotten closer, with our very, very direct communication. And, right now, I think 95% of the time it's very, very constructive, even when it's like a hard communication. Sometimes we argue a little bit, but it's always very constructive. So if that was going to happen, we would probably have a very constructive conversation around it.
You mean if he did get an injury?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it could happen to me too.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this. Let me switch topics slightly. There's a phenomenon I've noticed that happens to a lot of people in relationships, specifically after they've gone on for a time. It's this kind of like unconscious martyrdom that starts to creep into a relationship where, in the early times when you're just so in love, it's easy to, as an easy example, it's easy to just do the dishes every time. And when the other person leaves their dishes on the counter or their dirty socks in the bathroom, it's easy to just pick it up and not think about it. And you're doing it out of love. And then, you're working hard and you're getting tired and you're coming home late and 2 years have passed and the dopamine isn't quite as strong as it was in the beginning. And now you're kind of like, well, I'm still picking up this person's laundry and doing their dishes, and I really wish they would balance a little bit more. And then a little bit more time passes, and you're starting to become resentful, and then it turns into martyrdom, where I do so much work, and I really should get recognition for this, and I just don't. It seems to me that you guys probably are not at that phase yet, because you really are. Is it fair to say you're still pretty new?
Yeah.
So, but you've both been in long enough relationships to see that happen. And I'm curious, being at this place, looking forward to what could happen, what is that like? Knowing that you're in the really happy phase, but that these challenges are coming.
I think, or at least for me, we're still in a pretty happy phase, but there's been, the reality, like, for example, with the kind of person that she is, intensely focused on things. And sometimes there may, just with the ebb and flow of relationships, there's the ebb and flow of like, okay, there's work and then there's you and there's work. And, I think that, I've seen, for someone writing a book, the amount of time and effort it takes to do that, it's been a great experience to see what it's like when there's a heavy workload and what happens to the relationship. And then, but at the same time, you have to, she's the person I love. So I have to give that space for her to do those things, so that she can be successful, just like she gives me space. So looking ahead, I think you just allow that space for people to be and manage things, and understand that, yes, sometimes there will be a lot of time for a relationship and sometimes there may not be, but the foundation is there when you're caring or you love someone enough to like, okay, I'm going to give you the space to be who you are when you're stressed, who you are when you're tired, who you are when you're impatient, but that also gives the space for them for who they are when they're just ultra loving and there's caring and, complimentary. I mean, it's just the package,
Yeah, you're very much about taking things in the moment, one day at a time is a phrase for you, and maybe I'm using it too much, but
right.
You seem to have a lot of ability to just take the relationship as it is now and not worry so much about where it might go.
I think that just comes from, previous marriage. I was younger, and I think I had the ideal of what my parents' relationship was like. I still can't. It boggles my mind that they got married when they were like 21 years old. Wow. I think of what I was doing when I was 21.
Yeah.
Like, no way. I got married when I was 30. Still. And so by that time, yeah, they had 4 kids.
Wow.
So, the one day, so I had this notion in my head, like with my ex-wife, we had these plans and we were going to go, and I was so much in my 5-year plan and where we were going and like get X amount of dollars, we're going to move to this house and I'm going to have this job, and I was never in the moment
with her.
Never. That was my part. I was always like, when things would come up, I would always fall back and like, well, I'm being a responsible husband. I've got blah, 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 and just neglecting the day to day. And that was key, for me. I was like, oh, that's, if I'm ever going to be in a serious relationship, it's going to have to be, you're going to have to pay attention to the day to day. You can play the what if in the future game all you want, but you're going to end up missing what's going on day to day. And that's not how I approach the relationship.
And I think also, there's the previous marriage, but there's also your life experience, right? When you spend, 10 years in submarines and 2 years. So the way Matt calls it is, he says he spent 2 years as a project manager in theater, which to a lot of us in Silicon Valley means he was, making sure that some stuff were being shipped and maybe some relationship to the arts. Not at all. Like, in theater means in war zones, so at the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And project manager means that he was, coaching the border management executives on how to, reduce like drug smuggling and weapons like trafficking and sex trafficking and all sorts of crazy, things like that. So then you come back to San Francisco, California, and, your perspective on life is a little bit like different. And
yeah,
I think Matt's like really, really chill because of, the things he's seen. And
in theater doesn't mean summer stock in this case.
No.
Well, and how about for your part, Sophie-Charlotte?
So relationships, I think I have a very similar experience to what Matt has described, which is like relationships only work when they work in the moment. And that's one element. And the second element is they work when there's a commitment. But the hard part is balancing. Is exactly what Matt was describing. Is balancing that long-term commitment versus the be in the moment. And I think that in our relationship, we do a particularly awesome job at this. Right? We have this really strong commitment. We're not sure to what particularly that is. It's not like building a house or building a business or anything like that. But we have this really strong commitment, and then we have a day-to-day that's really, really fun.
I wonder, let me take a pause. I lost my train of thought on that. wanted to ask. Oh, okay. So I love this idea of your commitment, and it sounds like it's really grown and developed through this relationship, which speaks volumes for what's possible in the future. And now that makes me curious about the challenges that you're facing now. You're human beings, so you must be having some kinds of challenges, disagreements, maybe even fights at this stage, who knows? And if they're not now, they're going to happen. What do those look like for you guys?
Fights, they are typically about, the differences between her and I, she is, again, very focused, pretty regimented, has a lot of habits, whereas
She's laughing and nodding.
I don't. So, and because she is not afraid to be direct and ask for what she wants, and so a lot of times, it's if something happens, where there's a disagreement, it's usually around a habit, which I'll look at and like, that's really not necessary for me to do. And then, sometimes disagreements will bubble up from that, just routine things.
Like she wants you to take on a kind of like life structure.
Yeah. Oh, no, nothing that grandiose. Just usually it's something that, I think her favorite phrase is, do you think you would like to do this? And
when she says that,
that means like, you want me to do it. I'm like, well, no, I don't want to do it. And so, there are usually the disagreements will bubble up that.
Wait, what's an example? Yoga?
No, actually yoga. That's what was good. What's an example?
I can't think of any example.
Of course you can. Garbage. Something simple like that. And so normally if it's not a big deal, but I think sometimes if like I'm coming in from a long day and, we just have a busy lifestyle. So sometimes she'll ask me to do things and it's kind of like, really right now?
Yeah.
And that's when, sometimes, disagreements will happen from there or, just.
It is amazing to me how the little stuff like that can cause actual fights. With my fiance, it's just like that. I've been working. I'm tired. She comes in, has no idea of the context. She doesn't know that I've been sitting there cranking stuff out all day long, right? She's been off doing her thing. She walks in and she says, and it's usually phrased similar to that, like, do you think you want to take out the garbage or walk the dog? And then the thing that comes out of my mouth, of course, is kind of sarcastic. It's like, no, I don't think I want to walk the dog right now. I'm kind of busy. And that never goes over well. And then, of course, that can lead to another sarcastic statement and another, and then you're actually fighting. And then you have to wind it down and apologize and, in fact, go walk the dog, which is the thing you're always going to have to do to begin with.
You're going to have to end up doing whatever it was in the first place. But at least you have some little satisfaction. Like, I stood my ground for a little bit.
I love it. Okay, so any insight around that? Like, have you tried to adjust the way that you come at these sorts of requests?
Yeah, a lot actually. I think we both work a lot on this. So there are, it's interesting, like there are topics that will bring, recurring argument. We had, when Matt moved in, we had a series of like arguments around a TV, right? Where the TV was, like I have not had a TV since I left my parents' house, and he has this really nice TV, and we were looking for, like, I really wanted him to have the TV because I wanted him to feel welcome. He knew that I didn't want the TV, so he didn't want to bring the TV. And so we were sort of both trying to, like, be nice to one another, and we kept arguing about that TV for the wrong reasons, because I didn't really want the TV. He really wanted the TV, and he was saying, no, I'm not bringing the TV. And why don't you want to bring the TV? I want the TV. Let's give it a shot, you know. So, you know, it was kind of with good intentions, but we've been arguing. Like that was one of the big arguments.
This is actually, I'm very curious about that because I can imagine, he said that you have this very beautiful home with lots of wonderful artwork and it's designed very elegantly. And a lot of times, yeah, TV doesn't really fit into that environment. What did you guys end up doing with it?
So we brought the TV in. And
Well, I want to rehash this.
we
didn't bring the TV in. There was a situation where I was moving out, and like there's a situation with the box that I was in. It got destroyed, so I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna have to I had to get it out of the place that I was in before. And so she's like, well, why don't you bring the TV there? I'm like, no, I don't want to bring the TV. I never ever wanted to bring the TV in because I knew how strongly she felt was on, but I knew that she was trying to show, I mean, being a great hostess or just being hospitable.
Well,
is
and
like,
making the home partly
yeah,
yours.
yeah. I mean,
she's got to do that.
It's part of her. You know, that's nothing brings her more joy, and I get that. But I just knew the TV was just such a big point of consternation, and I was just like, I don't want to do this. But she's like, let's bring it. And then she's like, let's give it a try. And I was like, this is just not going to go well. And, you know, we gave it a try, and then that didn't work. And so I was just like, I was like, I'm taking this thing out of here. And then that was an upsetting situation because, you know, she's like, why are you doing this? Like, because you're not happy. You know, you don't want it here. Why would you have something here that you don't want? And she's like, well, I'm doing it for you. And I was like, no, it was just easier to not, because it wasn't a big deal.
It makes perfect sense to me, your perspective, and it makes perfect sense to me, your perspective, Sophie-Charlotte. What's interesting to me is it wasn't a fake disagreement. You know, that could have been like a funny sitcom comedy disagreement. Oh, no, you should bring it, you know, you're taking each other's sides. But it was actually a real disagreement that lasted for a long time. And when you finally took the TV out, she was kind of pissed, even though she wanted it gone.
Yes.
And
let's go into that, shall we?
This is what I want to go into. I want to know why. I understand why you were taking one another's perspective. What I'm curious about is when you gave it a try and it wasn't working, and Sophie-Charlotte, you were still upset that he was taking the TV out. What was that? What was that upset?
Well, the upset was he's moving into my house. So now it's our house, but it's sort of my house. And so if he doesn't feel like it's his house too, then he's not going to be happy, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, like the fact that he said I'm not bringing that TV was the fear that I had is that he was going to say like I don't feel welcome here.
Right.
That's
And if not at that moment, then eventually.
Eventually, of course. And that was the worry that, you know, that would come up as, you know, you didn't even let me bring my TV here or, you know, something like that.
Or something like that.
Yeah. So that was the big worry for me that, you know, he was going to say like, well, this is your house anyways, right? It's not our house. It's not something that we create together.
Did you ever distill that down and tell it to him?
Yeah, I think so. One thing that we do, you know, we've had a few of the, like 2 or 3 of these big topics, like the TV, and we'll have like a few arguments and then it's unresolved and then we resolve it. Like typically we'll go to like dinner together and we'll talk about, you know, kind of plans and lives, and then we'll just clear the air at one of these dinners. So that dinner was at Burma Love, if you remember.
Such a great restaurant.
It's a great place, yeah. And we just like talked about it, and all of a sudden, like we came out of the restaurant and it was like, boom, the air was cleared.
Fascinating, but why? How was the air cleared?
I think she actually realized that it was not a big deal to me. And I would much rather have peace in the household than have a TV. And I think when she believed that and understood that this wasn't something that was coming back, you know, then I think that helped out a lot.
So it sounds to me like the critical fear, the essence of the fear was that if she didn't cause the house to feel like your home, that she was going to lose you ultimately.
Yes.
I think for her, yes. And I was just trying to like, no, this is not a big deal at all.
have you have on that specific issue? Have you figured out a way to make the house both of your home?
But yeah. I mean, just without being able to show your listeners the place, or it's visually impactful when you walk in. There's a space where we hold parties and people are just, it's a very welcoming space that we have. And I understood that from the very beginning, that this is a place where, we both do things, like a lot of the tech world that she's in, and like the parties we've held or social gatherings, in my world, it's just something that we use to actually create more out in the world for us as far as opportunities and things. So that understanding, I mean, I have that, and I knew that TV was not part of this space, and it's and if you saw it, you would understand. But
no,
just,
I get it.
Yeah.
I get that. It's clear to me from the first moment you said it that TV wasn't going to fit in her
Right.
house. But I'm curious about how, this is. There's two really important questions out of what happened here from my mind. One is, how did Sophie-Charlotte allow herself to let go of this fear during dinner? That's probably the really important question.
Mm-hmm.
And the second, less important question is the one I'm on right now, frankly, which is, okay, but it is important for both of you to feel like you're at home in this space. And it was her space. She designed it. Most of the possessions in it are probably hers, the furniture, the location.
Except for that painting.
Except for the painting. True point. Yes, that's really actually very touching. They brought you together. Okay, that might be the answer. So how have you been able to feel like it's your home?
Well, I guess just it kind of comes from the background I'm in. Home for me really is, when I'm in the place that I want to be. It's just, I've had these crazy careers and just, moved all over the place, and, it's not about stuff. I don't have a lot of stuff per se, just because I've moved around. So I want to be with her and I want to be there. So for me, I don't need stuff. I don't need a TV. I'm happy where I am. I'm happy with the life that we have. So, I don't have to have there's a stamp. Matt was here,
Matt, you are the most romantic guy.
Absolutely.
Every one of his answers, am I right?
Yeah, it is very, very true. It's incredibly true. And was that like really, really funny. So how over that dinner,
Yes,
I started to feel like, oh no, he's not going to be like resentful or going away or pulling away or anything like that, is because we had one of these very kind of honest communication where, I think what happened is we go to dinner, and it's meant to be like a light dinner because we've been arguing a couple days and so on, and we sit down and we're having a little bit of fun, and then one of us, starts to like say, okay, let's, by the way, I think in that case it might have been me saying, by the way, that TV, you were right. Like, I don't really want a TV, but at the same time, I want you to feel at home. And he looks at me and he's like, honey, I feel at home, and then it's almost like, that's enough, then we talked about it for quite a bit longer, but
it sounds
that brutal honesty, the communication.
Yes, and that's your superpower.
Mm.
Yeah, it really sounds like the phrase I use for that is you named the game. You just brought it out of the darkness and stated, here's what's going on, and then let it melt away. Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned something earlier about both people feeling like we do too much, like we each feel like we do too much. That TV is one of the examples where it's like, oh, why am I doing so much? Why am I doing so much? And that for me is a memory from past relationships where I remember, and I know that whenever I feel I'm doing too much, the other person is probably feeling just the same. So we actually have, conversations about that. Like we'll start having, maybe a couple of arguments like, oh, I did the laundry like twice in a row. Like I think I said that a couple of weeks ago. And then I remember, no. If I feel I'm doing too much, you're probably feeling you're doing too much too.
That's a really great insight. So when you notice that, what is your way of bringing it up?
I think we typically will have a, couple of little frictions. Like we have some frictions sometimes in the morning. We're both, in a hurry, And then we communicate during the day. We use WhatsApp to communicate.
Yeah.
And so we'll have, say that little argument in the morning, like, oh, I'm doing laundry twice, whatever. And then he'll leave for work. I'll go do my thing and we'll WhatsApp, and then I'll say, like, in that case, I think I said, I think we're both feeling like we're doing too much. And, that, again, it's like that honesty is like, okay, boom, almost problem solved, right? While apologizing, like, oh, I'm sorry, I got upset.
Well, unless you really, really do feel it and that it's not okay.
Have we had that really happen?
Not yet. I mean, I think, like I said, it's just it has to be a give and take, We have, sometimes I'm busy, sometimes she's busy, and I think just having the understanding, if she travels, then I'll be doing stuff for 2-3 days and, I'll be gone, same thing, so.
Yeah, it's like if you're keeping tally, keep it over the long term.
Well, trying not to keep tally, because that's just a good way to that's like kind of adding stuff into the resentment column, if you're like, every tick mark, because it's, like I said, it's going to be an ebb and a flow. It's a relationship. There's you start keeping tallies. That's just the way to.
We actually, we joke about it, right? Like that's why we do some of these retreats. Like I want them like once or twice a year. And then between these workshops, like couples workshops, right? We joke, like we keep a list that we're all going to bring up, the dirty laundry at the couples workshop.
This is going on the list.
And it's becoming really fun.
Such a great idea.
Going on the list.
And then I'll be like, what's on your list? Like, I have nothing on my list,
Oh, no, wait. The theory of a list is I'm going to put it on the list and not talk to you about it until our 6 month. Or
until you're in front of a crowd,
Okay,
what's going on in your relationship? Like, well, let me bring out my list. And you just start reading it off. So.
That's so good. But what actually happens is being able to use that as a mechanism. You can talk about it in the moment. Yeah. That's really sweet.
We joke about it, yeah.
Well, you guys are a delight. It is so much fun to talk to you at this phase in your relationship, which is really exciting and fun and fertile, and also because you have so much experience and that you're bringing to it. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of fun to hear what's going on for you guys. So thanks for being on the show. Now, I like to end shows with a very quick game of this or that.
She's really competitive. And she loses poorly.
Well, I don't think you can win this game unless, Sophie-Charlotte, you've heard this game before on this show. Okay, good. Good. All right, so here's how it works. I'm going to say a this or a that, alternative statements, and point to one of you and see which one you prefer. Okay, it's very easy. We'll start simple. There's no winning of this game, Sophie-Charlotte.
look at her. She's bringing her hands.
Oh, he's so not competitive, Matt.
This is really great. I wish listeners could see Matt. You're just sort of chilling out. Okay, we're going to play a game. And Sophie sits up on it, ready to go. Okay, all right. So first question, simple. Sophie-Charlotte, coffee or tea?
Tea.
Coffee.
That was easy. All right. Another easy one. Chocolate or peanut butter?
Peanut butter.
Chocolate.
I love that they're so perfect opposites. Okay. Those two go really well together.
I've heard.
Okay. So, Charlotte, Batman or Superman?
Batman.
And why is that?
So, because Batman is a little bit more cynical. Realistic, I would say.
Yeah. I don't think a French woman could answer anything.
I know. I didn't want to say it, but I'm glad you did. It's a very,
Okay. And you?
Batman.
Yeah. He's got depth, right?
Well, he builds his own stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, there's nothing magical about it. He created all that stuff, so I can identify with that.
All right.
Yeah.
Blind or deaf?
Deaf.
Deaf.
Yeah. Okay. Second to last question. $1 billion. Oh, wait, I'm going to Sophie. $1 billion or enlightenment? Which would you choose?
Enlightenment.
Enlightenment.
Reluctantly, though.
No. I'd much rather have that than $1 billion.
Yes.
It was almost like the reluctance was in agreeing with her. Not
Well,
answering
yeah,
the
I know.
question.
I didn't want to agree. It's like, go to me first.
Okay, last question. If you had to either live forever, as in infinity, or die in the next 5 minutes, which would it be?
Next 5 minutes.
Well, therefore, me too.
Oh,
what? What? You're trying to win.
That was pretty adorable. Well, that's it for the episode with Matthew and Sophie-Charlotte, folks. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Matthew, for instance, if you'd like to learn how to race motorcycles from him, you can find his website at speedgrins.com, and I'll put that link in the show notes. Sophie-Charlotte is the author of the best-selling new book, Mobilized, The Formula for Mobile Success, and you can learn more about her at her website, which is scmoatti.com. That's scmoatti.com, and I'm going to put that link in the show notes as well. Special thanks to Shure Microphones, who donated their new MV51 model. It's especially made for podcasters, and I'm using it at this very moment. Thanks, guys. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed our show today, please subscribe to us on iTunes. It makes a big difference when you do that. Please consider donating to our Patreon campaign as well. You may know that we're on a mission to crush shame, and every penny really helps. You can find our campaign at patreon.com/together. That's patreon.com/together. If you have any questions or comments, or if you'd like to be on the show, please reach out via one of our platforms. You can find our website at www.together.guide. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/togethershow. Twitter and Instagram are both at together_show, or you can email me at host@together.guide. Our producer is Charlene Goto. Our web designer is Courtney Munna. Our art director and my one and only is Aubrey Pick. She's editing my headshot at this very moment. I can't wait to see it. Special thanks once again to our guests, Sophie-Charlotte and Matthew. Guys, let's go for a motorcycle ride. Why not? That's all for today, folks. See you next time.